I want to make this quite clear, by the way. Anyone who says, well, you talk about Islam quite a lot on the show, don't want to do it. Rather not at all. Speak about anything else. But whilst it's an issue and a problem, we have to. Others won't. I'm afraid we're not going to sit down and do nothing. We have too much integrity and courage for that. Islam and terror, Islam and crime, Islam and the possibility or impossibility of coexistence in a Western pluralistic society. We're not meant to mention all this, but we shall. Now, Islam and the number of Muslims in prison, for example, throughout Europe. Psychologist and writer Nikolaj Sennels joins us from Denmark. This is fascinating stuff. Welcome to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, you're a licensed psychologist. You've done all sorts of work in various areas. You've just written something which I found to be fascinating. Please explain.
Yeah, well, I actually wrote it several times. I wrote also a book. It's only out in Danish until now. But what I explain is the psychological differences between, you could say, people who have been who've grown up in a Muslim culture and people who have grown up in a Western culture.
Mm-hmm. And what are the main differences?
My conclusion is that there are four main differences. One difference is the view on anger, where we here in the West in general feel that anger is a negative feeling, and showing anger is a weakness. It shows lack of control and bad style and so on. While in Muslim culture, anger and aggression is seen as something that shows strength, and it's shown as something positive. Mm. Then the second difference concerns, you could call self-confidence or honor, where we in the West would say that if we are able to handle criticism calmly and rationally and non-aggressively, we would see that as a sign of good self-confidence. While in Muslim culture, people are brought up to have this very fragile egos because of this the honor concept, which makes them very vulnerable to criticism. And here you see that it's the opposite again, that people are seen as strong if they react aggressively when criticized. And then there's a difference between the view on identity and on self-responsibility also. Mm-hmm.
How many was that? Was that 2 or 3? I've lost count now.
That was 2.
Okay.
Should you give the rest 2?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, when it comes to self-responsibility, in psychology, we have a concept called outer locus of control and inner locus of control. And this locus of control says something about people's experience of how their lives are decided. And we here in the West are mainly brought up to feel what's called inner locus of control. That means that we see our life guided by the way we think, our way of handling our emotions, our choices, our actions, and so on. While in the Muslim culture, people are mainly brought up to feel that their lives are guided by outer factors, maybe outer authorities, religious or cultural traditions, Allah, and stuff like that. And that means that in the Western culture, we are quite, at least compared to Muslim culture, we are quite self-responsible, and Muslims would be seen from our side as quite irresponsible, always blaming others for their problems and so on. Mm-hmm. And then finally, it comes to identity. We are taught to be open and tolerant, while they are taught that they are better than others, and that others are, actually so bad that they deserve a lot of pain and suffering after death. And for some Muslims also think that we deserve a lot of suffering in this life and so on. Mm. So we're brought up to be tolerant, and they're brought up to be intolerant. That's my conclusion after having more than 100 Muslims on my couch and the same amount of non-Muslims on my couch.
Right. So this is not confined to those growing up in an Islamic country. It's also Muslims living in the Islamic diaspora in countries like Denmark and Sweden and Britain and so on.
Yeah, that's what I base my conclusions on. That's from therapy in prisons in Denmark.
Mm. Let me ask you about prisons, because there was another report from British prisons, and I found it quite fascinating because British immigration from South Asia was was pretty evenly spread between Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim. I mean, Sikh was a minority, a smaller religion, but those three groups, and Buddhists to a degree, but those three religions came to Britain at the same time. If anything, Sikhs faced more discrimination because of the wearing of the turban, and I would argue that Islam probably was treated better because of the idea of monotheism. If you look at the British prison system now, it's almost unheard of to have a Sikh or a Hindu in a British prison, but the Islamic prison population is enormous and getting bigger all the time. Are we seeing this in Scandinavia as well?
I don't know how big the increase is, but I know that in youth prisons in Denmark, that's the only place from where I have really precise statistics. Then the Danish youth prisons are 70% of the inmates have a Muslim background.
Good Lord.
And they only constitute I don't know, maybe between 5 and 10% of the adolescent population in Denmark.
I'm staggered it's that high. That is incredibly high.
It is, yeah.
And these aren't political. I mean, in Britain, the Muslims in prison, they're not there for. I mean, there are political prisoners, but they're there for various crimes. And what the psychological report, the psychiatric report concluded was that many of them had left their faith behind, but some of the social consequences, misogyny, for example, the deep hatred of homosexuals, of Jews and so on, that was still there.
Yeah, it's the same in Denmark. That's also my experience, yes.
What do we do about this? Is there any solution?
I'm afraid not. It doesn't look like it. I mean, a lot of people have tried. We spend billions of Danish kroners each year in Denmark on integration projects, on crime prevention and so on, social projects that are supposed to get the immigrants into the job market and off their criminal careers and so on. And it doesn't work. And I know that they're trying the same all over Europe, at least Western Europe, where we have a lot of problems with those immigrants. And it doesn't seem that anything works, even though they have the best people, best educated, have a lot of money, but nothing works. And I find that there are three reasons for that. And first of all, you have to ask yourself, why would or should Muslim immigrants want to immigrate or to integrate into our societies, take over our values and so on? Why should they when they still get money and food and health care and everything else, even if they don't? And secondly, far the most of the Muslim immigrants are simply not allowed to integrate into our societies. If they take over our views on free speech, on the equality of women, on tolerance between different religions and so on, they are threatened and often even punished for their new views. And then finally, simply integrating into our society is very difficult. Learning our languages, feeling comfortable with our values and so on. It's not so easy if you're brought up to feel very different or even opposite on many central points.
Yes. Well, I mean, I can't pretend I feel optimistic, but reality sometimes can be quite bleak. Really appreciate this. Thank you so very much indeed.
Yes, thank you, Mike. And thank you again for inviting me.
Pleasure.
Some other aliens came just after your visit. Kind aliens. They said, we will share our science with you. And all they asked for in return was half my population to grind up in their mandibles and feed to their larval young. You see, different cultures can get along.